Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how I made this buttercream Winter Wonderland Landscape wedding cake. This is all buttercream and piped, and I'm going to show you exactly how it's done. So let's get right to it. First things first, we need to get our cake ready to be decorated. Now I'm starting with already filled cake tiers, and it was a 6-inch and an 8-inch, and there's 3 layers of cake and 2 layers of buttercream on each tier. Now this is my crusting American buttercream that I used, and I will try to remember to add a link in the video description. I do have a video on how I make that, so if you're interested in making the same buttercream, you will be able to do so. Now this is our crumb coat. So what I'm doing is locking in those crumbs so that when we do our final coat of buttercream, you don't see the crumbs. They don't poke through. And especially since this is a white on white design, we want to make sure that the crumbs are definitely locked in the first layer of the crumb coat. When we do our second layer, we need to make sure that it is thick enough that we're not going to see the cake through the buttercream. Sometimes that does happen, and I find that what helps with that is just making sure that you have a good crumb coat. Start with that, and then just make sure that your second layer of buttercream is thick enough. Now we're going to do the same thing with the 8-inch tier. A lot of this tutorial is going to be really just kind of watching what I'm doing. There's only so much explaining to do because it's piping and it takes a little while, so it's going to be a lot of watching me actually produce it. So we'll see. I might put some Christmas music in here. We'll see. I've had some people say that they don't like the music in the background as much. So I've been kind of staying away from that the last couple of videos, but this might be one of those times where I'm going to go ahead and put some of that in. Now I should let you know that after I crumb coat the cake, I put it in the freezer for 10 minutes. Or the refrigerator for 20. And what I typically do is when I'm doing more than one tier on a cake, I will start with one, put it in the freezer, and then while that one is chilling, I work on the other one because we want to have our buttercream nice and firm and set for our decorating purposes. Now, the way that I'm doing the background of this landscape is kind of a hilly, mountainous kind of background. And I'm just using parchment paper. I'm going to do a buttercream transfer. And I just piped a line just to mimic the background landscape. And I'm just filling in with some buttercream. You don't need to have this overly thick. Maybe 1/8 of an inch thick, because you have your layer of buttercream underneath it already. There's going to be quite a bit of buttercream since you're piping too. So you don't have to make this overly thick. Let's not overcomplicate things. And once I get the buttercream on there, I will smooth it out with a scraper. You don't have to be overly careful with that, just because this is the back side. The front side is the other side. And then we're going to do the same thing with our bottom tier. And I had measured out the circumference and the height of each tier to make sure that when I cut the pieces of parchment that they are the correct size. And a lot of the times, if you've watched my videos before, you see that I use acetate sheets a lot instead of parchment paper. But in this particular design, I wanted to add some texture to the background. And parchment is a little bit more flexible. Well, quite a bit more flexible. The acetate is firm. And you'll see how I'm going to add that the texture to it in just a second here. And it really can only be done with parchment paper between the two options. And then just pick it up and wrap it around my chilled cake. Now, if you have excess, I do cut the width of the parchment paper a little bit larger or longer than I need it. And just to make sure you have enough. And then I just wrap one end over the other. And I'm just using my fingers and my hands to add some texture to the buttercream before I set it in the freezer to set up. Just kind of, how the background of, like in a painting, in my mind, I use paintings as kind of the way I was looking at this cake. you're going to have layers of texture within the paint. Well, I am trying to add some layers of texture with just my hands in the buttercream. And I was very pleased with the way that it turned out. Now that they have set up in the freezer, I remove them one at a time and just pull that parchment paper right off, and you can see the texture layer that's left on that buttercream. You know that it's firm enough to remove when you can remove a corner and it comes off easily. And then when you reach that point where the pieces are overlapped, just pull down, straight down, and that's going to remove the excess. Then you can just use your scraper to kind of scrape off the extra if there's a little bit of an overlap or just like a line, a thicker line where the two met. And then I'm using a tip number 3, I believe. Yeah, a tip number 3, 2 or 3, either one would be fine. And this is simply how you make your trees. It's actually very simple. When you look at this design, not knowing how it's done, it looks pretty complicated. But that's one of the challenges I really like in cake design, is when somebody gives me an inspiration picture, being able to kind of figure out how to tackle this. So I knew that I needed to do the background first, and then you build up towards the outside from there. So I drew straight lines down with the buttercream to kind of mark where my trees were going to be, and those are kind of like the trunk of the cake. You're not really going to see that, but it was kind of more of a guide for me. And then I just did horizontal lines of buttercream, and then I'm just roughing it up with my fan brush. And I did this all the way around both tiers, varying the sizes of the trees, different heights. And some of them I placed close together, and some of them I spaced further apart. I was kind of going more for a layered, again, a layered look, like you would achieve with acrylic paints or oil-based paints on a canvas. Same kind of idea. And now that we're getting our trees basically done, I went ahead and I used my tip. Well, first of all, I piped a rim of frosting around the bottom, and I just used that offset angled spatula to smooth it down, and that's kind of the snow on the ground. I used the same tip. Now I know I'm moving on to the stacking of the 2 tiers, but to explain, I use the same tip with the buttercream to pipe little dots to add another layer of texture to the branches of the pine trees. And I just used 5 boba tea straws, the same height as the cake. Place them in the cake, use some buttercream to adhere the top tier to the bottom tier. And there it is all done. I just added some greenery to the bottom, just some pine cones and some greenery. And that is my final look. I did not see it at the venue again, just like recently in another video. So I don't know how they decorated it there, but I decorated it this way for you. So I hope you liked it, and I hope you got something from it, and we'll catch you on the next one.